Take a look at this bizarre scene. A giant gorilla is playing with a dinosaur's mouth. Why is this happening? It turns out that Annie and a struggling dinosaur had fallen together. Fortunately, they were close to the ground, and Annie wasn't injured when she hit the floor. Desperate to escape, Annie quickly got up and ran, but the dinosaur also stood up and began slowly advancing toward her. Cornered, Annie thought she was about to be eaten. Suddenly, the gorilla, named Kong, glared at the dinosaur, refusing to let anyone harm Annie. However, the dinosaur wasn't intimidated and continued to approach Kong. Seeing this, Annie cautiously moved closer to Kong. Once Kong saw Annie safely beneath him, he charged at the dinosaur in a rage. What followed was one of the most iconic scenes. Kong battling the dinosaur. Kong bit off the dinosaur's tongue, and the two engaged in a fierce struggle. Annie was stunned by the intensity of the fight. Soon, Kong pinned the dinosaur to the ground and even ripped its jaw apart. After confirming the dinosaur was no longer a threat, Kong let out a thunderous roar into the sky, leaving Annie in awe. Annie couldn't believe that Kong had fought so fiercely to protect her. Kong then turned his back on Annie, seemingly indifferent but still a little annoyed. At that moment, Annie was convinced that Kong would never harm her. When Kong walked away, Annie quickly followed, knowing she couldn't survive alone in this dangerous place without his protection. Kong eventually brought Annie back to his home. This time, instead of roaring at her, he sat quietly under the setting sun. Seeing Kong's unhappiness, Annie tried to cheer him up with some playful tricks. Despite her efforts, Kong remained unmoved at first, but Annie didn't give up, and her persistence slowly softened Kong's demeanor. When Kong finally stopped being angry, Annie couldn't help but smile. Kong gazed at the golden sunset, and Annie too was captivated by the beautiful view. She even tried to teach Kong how to describe beauty. At that moment, Kong extended his massive hand, and Annie, no longer afraid, willingly sat in his palm. Late at night, as Annie and Kong slept, Jack suddenly found Annie. He quietly woke her up, and Annie was shocked to see him. She had assumed Jack had already left with the other crew members on the ship. She couldn't believe he had risked his life to come back for her. Jack was equally emotional, thrilled to have found Annie. As Annie prepared to leave Kong's hand, Kong suddenly opened his eyes. Due to movie rights restrictions, this is where the story ends. The film is called King Kong.